The slave markets of Varnock Prime had long lost any trace of shame. Beneath the blistering yellow suns, hundreds of auction cages lined the scorched iron plazas, each one filled with beings who once had names, cultures, and families. Now just property with price tags. Ronan Vex, a human foreman contracted to repair terraforming rigs for the Galactic Empire, had walked through many of these markets before, never comfortable with what he saw, but trained by war to keep his feelings locked behind pragmatic silence. On this day, however, something felt off. The silence was louder, the heat sharper, the stench of desperation clung thicker than usual, and it led him to a dark stall, tucked behind the standard rows, where even the slavers looked away. There, caged alone, was a female alien unlike any Ronan had ever seen. Her skin a mottled gray-violet, eyes swollen and sunken from dehydration, her bones far too sharp for her thin frame, and her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if to preserve the last warmth of her soul. The tag above her cage didn't read a price. It simply read, "Unsellable," and the slaver beside her spat in the dust when Ronan approached, sneering, "She's not worth the bolt in her collar, human. No one wants her. She begs for death." Ronan didn't answer. He didn't flinch or scoff or sneer like the others did. He simply stepped closer, crouching to meet the woman's eyes through the grime-streaked bars. She didn't react at first. Only when she felt the shadow of someone not laughing did she shift slightly, revealing lips cracked and bleeding, and eyes too exhausted to fear anymore. "I'm not broken," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I'm just not pretty enough to survive here." And Ronan, with a stillness shaped by years of battlefields and ruined outposts, answered gently, "Then it's a good thing I don't need pretty. I only need real." Without asking another question, without caring who watched, he stood and walked to the slaver's registry terminal, pulling out his identicard, and said the words that turned a dozen heads across the plaza. "How much to transfer her to me?" "I'll sign now." The rust-blooded clerk stammered, confused, unsure if this was a prank or a test. No one asked to take the unsellable. Usually they were shipped to the grinder mines, or simply disposed of in the acid pits of Vargul's Crescent. But Ronan's ID flashed red-level clearance, a war veteran turned engineer under contract with the Galactic Defense Fleet, and credits blinked across the screen before the slaver could even ask a price. The girl didn't resist when they deactivated her collar. She just collapsed into Ronan's arms like a sack of bones and faded sighs. When he lifted her, she didn't weigh enough for a creature that should have stood nearly 6 feet tall. Like starvation had hollowed out half her existence already. Her name, if she had one, wasn't on the records. Only a designation code burned into her shoulder, SXR-4A. Ronan didn't take her to the barracks or the mechanical storage units that usually processed post-sale assets. Instead, he carried her across the burning streets to a water vendor's corner stall, ordered the cleanest mineral-rich water they had, and offered her the cup with both hands. She didn't trust it. Her cracked lips trembled, her hand hovered in disbelief, and when the first drop touched her tongue, she wept so violently that the vendor quietly closed shop and turned away. "You didn't ask for my service," she whispered through the sobs. "You didn't ask for anything." Ronan knelt beside her, adjusting the blanket he'd wrapped around her shoulders, and said in that unshakable voice, "You were dying in a cage, and that wasn't right. So now, you're not in that cage anymore. That's all the reason I need." When she finally looked up at him again, there was something in her gaze that hadn't been there before. Not hope, no, that was too far off, but the faint, flickering ember of worth, like a child seeing a star through storm clouds for the first time. "Sarroxa," she said quietly, naming herself at last. "I was Sarroxa once, before they stripped it away." And Ronan only nodded, as if he already knew, and replied with the kind of reverence not usually given to the fallen or the forgotten. "Then Sarroxa it is. Welcome back." The outpost where Ronan Vex lived wasn't built for comfort. It was a refitted mining module from an old Terran deployment era, bolted into the rock flats of Ordenis 6, a frontier moon with more dust than rain and more silence than stars. His shelter was small, 2 rooms, a ration box, a wash basin, but it was clean, quiet, and protected by proximity alarms and an old gun turret salvaged from a forgotten war. When he carried Sarroxa inside for the first time, she didn't speak. Her eyes swept the room with the cautious detachment of someone who'd been moved from cell to cell her whole life, waiting for the next chain or blow or command. But none came. He laid her gently on the bed, placed a folded blanket under her head, and set a steaming bowl of synth vegetable stew on the crate beside her. When she stirred, her eyes flinched toward the food, but she didn't touch it. "It's real," Ronan said quietly, pouring himself a cup of the same. "Nothing in it but what your body needs." She studied him as if searching for the trick, the fine print, the moment when the mask would slip and reveal cruelty beneath kindness. But Ronan didn't demand anything. He didn't even stare at her. He just sat across from her on the floor, eating in silence. Then, after what felt like a century stretched into minutes, she reached for the bowl. Her fingers trembled, not from weakness now but from disbelief. Eating with someone, not for someone. She took a spoonful, closed her eyes, and exhaled like something broken had loosened inside her chest. When she finally opened them, she looked directly at him and said again, "Sarroxa." It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a declaration, a reclamation. And Ronan, without lifting his gaze from the stew, responded, "Yeah, I heard you the first time," then added, almost like a ritual, "It's a good name. It deserves better memories." That night, she didn't sleep in the bed. She curled up beside it, on the floor, with her back to the wall. But Ronan let her. Healing, he knew, didn't start with comfort. It started with the right to choose. The right to feel safe again, on your own terms. He dimmed the lights and said nothing more. But before he dozed off in the chair, he heard her say his name in return for the first time, not as a question, but as something soft and settled. "Ronan?" She remembered it. The days that followed weren't dramatic. They were slow, filled with silence and repetition, and the soft, cautious restoration of things that had been torn away too long ago. Ronan fixed modules during the day, soldered power cells, stabilized heat vents, and left half his plate untouched at every meal, knowing Sarroxa's body still needed more rebuilding than his. She ate little at first, slept with one eye open, and flinched at sudden noises. Even the beeping of his tools sent her spine rigid. But there was no abuse in this place. No threats, no slaver's bark, no trading price whispered behind her back. Only the sound of a soldier humming a tune as he fixed broken machines. One day, as he returned from salvaging a collapsed comms relay, he found her in the corner of the workshop, watching him. She didn't speak at first, but her fingers traced the edge of a disassembled scanner, curiosity flickering in her alien eyes. Ronan didn't scold her. Instead, he set down the heavy core pack he carried and said, "You ever break something on purpose, just to see if you can fix it?" She blinked. "Is that what you do?" He shrugged. "Not always. Sometimes I just fix what the galaxy gave up on." That afternoon, he showed her how to recalibrate a servo ring. Her hands were clumsy at first. He didn't touch her, just guided with words, with patience, with respect. It took an hour to finish what would have taken him 10 minutes alone, but it was never about the time. It was about the look in her eyes when the scanner blinked green. Not pride yet, but surprise. Surprise that her hands could build, not just suffer. That evening, as he cooked their meal, she asked a question without looking at him. "Why are you doing this?" Ronan didn't answer right away. He stirred the pot, let the steam rise between them, then finally said, "Because one day, someone found me after I nearly died in a crater during the Europa siege. They carried me, fed me, didn't ask for repayment, just said, 'Someone should have done it for me, so I'll do it for you.' I never got to thank them." He placed the bowl in front of her. Not with pity, but equality. "Maybe this is me saying thanks. Maybe it's just what humans do when we remember what it means to be people." And Sarroxa, silent for a long while, finally said something she hadn't dared in years. "I want to remember that too." Ronan didn't expect the moment it happened. The sky over Ordnance 6 was bruised with a reddish hue, the atmosphere soaked in electrical dust from a drifting storm, and the generator had just blown a coolant seal. He cursed under his breath as steam hissed out of the back wall panel like a cornered animal. Sparks lit the dim hallway, and he staggered back, wiping his grease-slick hands on his shirt. That's when Sarroxa entered, cautious but steady, clutching the old scanner she had been working on the past 3 days. Her eyes, once dull and wounded, now held a flicker of something different. An ember of belonging, of purpose. I think I know what's wrong with the coil alignment, she said, voice steady, eyes on the exposed panel like she'd lived beside circuits all her life. He didn't argue. He just stepped aside and watched her crawl halfway into the panel cavity, wires dancing dangerously close to her wrist as she rerouted a burnt lead. "You sure?" he muttered. "Looks like a mess in there." She didn't answer, just pulled the scanner out, tapped the screen twice, then tightened a bolt near the base of the coil. The lights flickered once, then stayed on. She backed out, brushing rust from her cheek. Ronan stared, blinking. "You fixed it." She smirked, and then, like a crack in the firmament of pain and memory, she laughed. A short, almost confused sound, but it was a laugh nonetheless. Ronan stood frozen. He hadn't heard her laugh before, not even a shadow of it. And in that moment, the broken coil and the dusty air didn't matter. He laughed too, louder than he meant to, startling her again, but this time she didn't flinch. She blinked at him and said, "It's the first time anything I've done didn't make someone angry." Ronan leaned back against the wall and crossed his arms, nodding. "Around here, fixing things is sacred. You just became a priestess of broken things." That night, she sat at the table instead of the floor. They shared the last of the red fruit extract he'd been saving for emergencies. He figured this counted. Sarroxa looked out the window at the storm flashing in the sky, her voice barely audible when she said, "I thought the universe would laugh at me if I ever smiled again." Ronan refilled her cup and replied, "Then we'll laugh louder." The knock came at dawn. Sharp and deliberate, a sound that did not belong to the wilderness. Ronan opened the door with his plasma rifle half raised, eyes narrowed, ready for scavengers or worse. Instead, he found a tall, cloaked figure, their face half hidden beneath a diplomatic hood, and a delegation badge glinting against their chest. "I'm looking for a property known as Sector 24 Gamma," the figure said in a flat tone. "We've been informed of a missing former asset of the Arcuran Exchange. Description matches an escaped experimental slave named Sarroxa." Behind Ronan, she had already vanished into the shadows of the workshop, her breath caught in her throat. The man's tone was indifferent, almost bored, like he was asking about a missing crate, not a life. "She's not here," Ronan said evenly. "No such person lives at this outpost." The envoy tilted his head slightly, not convinced but not equipped for conflict. "If found," he said, sliding a data rod across the doorway, "return her immediately. She is Imperial property. Reacquisition is authorized with force." Then he turned and vanished into the dust. Ronan stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the horizon, feeling the faint tremble of Sarroxa's breath behind him. When he turned, he found her crouched under the bench, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She didn't look at him. "They'll come back," she whispered. "They always do. They never stop." Ronan knelt beside her, slow and quiet. "Not this time." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, grounding her as she trembled like a trapped wire. "They'll have to get through me first, and that won't go well for them." Her eyes flicked to his. For the first time, they held something dangerous, a whisper of hope. Not blind faith, but the cautious kind, built slowly like armor on old scars. That evening, Ronan began upgrading the perimeter. Reinforced walls, proximity mines, and encrypted satellite scramblers. Not because he was afraid. Because she was his now. Not in ownership, but in responsibility. In choice. And he knew he'd burn half the galaxy before letting her fall back into chains. The wind howled through the ravines that night like a wounded beast, dragging dust and whispers over the corrugated metal rooftops of the outpost. Ronan had sealed every outer hatch, set the sentry drones to full sweep, and was busy welding the new carbon plate over the main entry panel when he realized Sarroxa hadn't spoken in hours. She wasn't hiding, she had simply gone quiet, vanished deeper into herself than usual, like a shadow trying to outrun its source. He found her curled in the far corner of the engine bay, underneath a tarp half covered in crates, staring at nothing, her claws twitching faintly like her body was stuck in a dream she couldn't wake from. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her and waited, the soft creak of the structure and the crackling warmth of the nearby power coil, the only sounds between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he almost thought it came from the storm outside. "When they took me in chains, I was 13, she said, her eyes still locked on a rusted bolt on the wall. "My mother tried to bargain for me. They broke her spine in front of me. My siblings were too young to fight. They watched, too. And when I screamed, they put the shock collar on for the first time. She pulled her knees up, knotted her fingers together, and added, "Every time someone's helped me since then, it was only to take something later." Ronan didn't respond with a speech. He didn't offer a hollow promise, didn't say, "Not me," like a fool who thought kindness was enough to erase history. Instead, he reached across the narrow space and simply held out his hand. No pressure, no command, just presence. It stayed there, open, motionless, until finally, after a long pause in which the storm outside shifted like a beast circling a kill, she reached for it. Her fingers trembled as they touched his calloused palm. She didn't squeeze, but she didn't pull away either. Her breath hitched, eyes darting up to meet his. And in that fragile crossing, something cracked. Not shattered, not violently, but like old armor giving way to a sunbeam for the first time in years. She crawled closer, cautiously, as though expecting punishment, and placed her head against his chest. He felt the ridges of her horns brush his collarbone, felt her exhale like a dam finally breaching. He held her then, not as a soldier or a rescuer or a savior, but as a man who saw her, all of her, and asked nothing in return. That night, she didn't sleep on the floor. She slept beside him, beneath a blanket too thin for the cold, wrapped around his side like a frightened child learning how to trust the dark. And when he woke at dawn with her still there, her clawed fingers tangled in the fabric of his sleeve, he whispered, "They'll never hurt you again, not while I breathe." And for the first time in her life, no one took that promise away. The dropship arrived 3 days later with a roar that fractured the horizon. It didn't bother with secrecy or subtlety. No cloaking, no code signal. Just the sharp roar of ion thrusters pounding against the cliffs, flattening the brush and sending birds scattering. Ronan was already suited up when the blast wave hit, his rifle strapped across his back, his pulse steady. Sarroxa stood beside him, armored now in pieces he'd forged to fit her alien form, eyes cold and unblinking. She didn't ask if she should hide. She didn't tremble. She stood. The Empire had sent retrieval officers this time, black-helmed, faceless, voices filtered through static like insects whispering commands. "We are authorized to reclaim Imperial property," the lead said, stepping from the drop ramp with a data tablet held like a warrant of death. "That woman belongs to the crown of Volcura. Stand down, human?" Ronan replied without blinking, "She belongs to herself, and she stays." The officers raised their plasma rifles. That's when Sarroxa stepped forward, teeth bared at the first sound from her throat, a growl so deep it made the sentry towers hum in sympathy. "Try," she said, "just that. One word." The leader gave the hand signal. The battle that followed was short and savage. Ronan moved like water through the attackers, not fast but decisive. Every shot a takedown, every motion rehearsed in the marrow of a man who had once stormed strongholds for sport. Sarroxa fought beside him, not behind. She threw one of the officers into the bulkhead, hard enough to dent the alloy, and then tore the power core from another's chest plate with a wrench she'd once used to fix their heating vent. Within minutes, the ramp was slick with sparks and broken bodies. The ship retreated, its pilot too smart to die for a cause already lost. Ronan's breath came in slow, heavy draws. His knuckles were bloodied, his visor cracked. But he was standing. So was she. She turned to him in the silence afterward, her face unreadable. Her lips trembled slightly, and he thought she might collapse. Instead, she stepped into him with sudden force, wrapped her arms around his chest, and whispered against his ear, "They'll never own me again. Not as long as you're mine." He didn't answer right away. He just held her tighter. The sentry towers blinked overhead, recording nothing, just the quiet peace of two souls still breathing in the wreckage of violence. They stood there long after the smoke cleared, the wind returning to whisper through the dust. A new storm was brewing on the edges of the galaxy, but neither of them flinched. Because now, for the first time, they weren't alone. That night, the outpost lay in deep silence, as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. The fires from the skirmish had long since cooled to embered rubble, and the scent of scorched metal had given way to the dry cold of the plains. Inside the low-lit confines of Ronan's makeshift bunk room, half medic station, half engineer's haven, The warmth of the heater hummed low as Sarroxa sat on the cot, a blanket draped over her shoulders like a veil of thought. She had not spoken since the confrontation, not a word since she held him after the battle, but Ronan didn't press her. He moved with quiet grace, cleaning his bloodied gauntlets in the sink, checking his ribs under the light with a wince, and glancing at her only when he thought she wouldn't see. But she always did. Her gaze followed him like the moon followed the tide. Silent, relentless, tethered by something ancient and stirring. "Ronan," she said, her voice low and foreign like a note on an instrument that had only just learned to sing. Do you want me here?" He stopped moving. That was all. He didn't drop the cloth, didn't turn instantly, didn't gasp like a man struck. He simply stilled, and when he turned, his eyes held no surprise, only something infinitely older. "Sarroxa," he said, stepping toward her with his palm open, "you were never just here. You were always mine to protect, not to possess. I want you like a sunrise wants the horizon, unfolding, not chained." She looked down then, her shoulders shaking. But not from cold. "I don't know what I am without fear," she whispered. "I don't know how to ask for something unless I'm desperate." Then she reached out slowly, with the same trembling hands she once used to shield her children from cold crates and iron cells, and placed them on his chest. "I am asking now," she said, eyes wide with a courage that looked like breaking. "I want to be yours, not as property, but as family. I want you to be mine. Will you be ours?" Ronan didn't answer with words at first. He bent his head, placed his forehead against hers, and let the weight of 100 broken memories flow into that quiet breath between them. Then he whispered, "Yes," and that word, just that, was the beginning of everything neither of them had ever dared to imagine. Morning arrived gently, as if the galaxy itself had decided not to wake them too harshly. The storm had passed, the clouds above fractured into bands of soft gold light that bathed the barren cliffs in warmth. Ronan stood outside the outpost repairing the wind sensor on the tower when he heard the soft thud of small feet behind him. He turned and found the twins, Rika and Nurin, watching him with their heads tilted like curious little owls, bundled in his old jackets, their expressions wary but no longer afraid. "We made you something," Nurin mumbled, holding out a piece of scorched metal he had crudely hammered into the shape of a badge. It had a triangle etched into it, 3 crude lines, uneven but deliberate. Ronan knelt to take it, brushing their hair back from their eyes. "What's this for?" he asked, smiling. "For saving us. For being." Rika's voice wavered. "Ours." That was when Sarroxa appeared at the doorway, her hair wet from washing, that wrapped in a long engineer's coat Ronan had sewn for her. She looked like a queen, dressed in borrowed armor, unpolished, fearless, whole. She walked over without hesitation, took the children's hands in hers, and nodded toward Ronan with a breath that seemed to steady her for what she was about to do. "This place, this man, these hands," she said softly, "saved us not because he had to, but because he couldn't bear to look away. And now, we don't want to leave." Ronan rose to meet her, his hand brushing her cheek, then reaching down to ruffle Nurin's hair. "Then don't," he said simply. "Stay. Not as refugees, not as saved things, but as family." Sarroxa blinked fast, her jaw trembling. Then she leaned forward, pressed her lips against his in a kiss that was not about passion or victory, but peace. When it broke, she whispered, "You gave us life again. Let us give you ours." Later that day, Ronan etched their names, his, Sarroxa's, Rika's, and Nurin's, into the side of the outpost door above the new symbol the twins had drawn. Not a warning, not a memorial, but a mark of beginning. And the stars above, for once, felt closer than they ever had in all his years of war.